Dear friends, this is a real story that happened in 1972. An Uruguayan Air Force plane carrying 45 people, mainly young rugby players from Montevideo and their friends and families, crashed deep in the snow-covered Andes Mountains while flying to Chile. What followed was one of the most extraordinary survival stories ever told. The 45 people, comprising 40 passengers and 5 crew members. Most of the passengers were young men in their late teens and early 20s, members of the Old Christians Club rugby team from Montevideo, Uruguay. They were traveling to Santiago, Chile, to play a match. Along with them were friends, family members, and supporters, including a few women and older adults. Since the Andes Mountains stood between the two cities, the flight plan had the aircraft flying south into Argentina, then turning west and crossing the Andes at a lower altitude pass near Curacao, Chile. But things went tragically wrong. Due to cloudy weather and poor visibility, the co-pilot misjudged their location and believed they had already crossed the Andes, when in fact, they were still deep in the mountains. Based on that incorrect assumption, they began descending far too early. As the plane lowered, the crew suddenly saw towering peaks directly ahead. Despite an attempt to pull up, the right wing clipped a mountain ridge, breaking off. The left wing and tail were torn away soon after. The main fuselage continued to glide through the air before crashing into a glacier at around 12,000 feet, 3,600 meters, in the Andes Mountains. Search and rescue aircraft overflew the crash site several times during the following days, but failed to see the white fuselage against the snow. Search efforts were called off after 8 days of searching. As they were stranded at an altitude of about 3,600 meters, where temperatures dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius at night, they had no proper winter clothing, just the light clothes they wore for travel. The fuselage of the broken plane became their only shelter, offering very little protection from the icy winds and snow. They found a small AM transistor radio jammed between 2 aircraft seats. They made a long antenna using electrical wire from the plane, and on the 11th day on the mountain heard the news that their search had been called off. 29 people initially survived the crash. Many succumbed on the first night due to cold, or later due to injuries and an avalanche. Only 16 survived after spending 72 days in the harsh, freezing Andes Mountains. After the crash, the survivors had only a small amount of food, a few chocolate bars, some wine, crackers, and snacks. They rationed it strictly, eating tiny portions each day. But at that high altitude, with freezing temperatures, their bodies burned calories quickly. Within just a week, all the food was gone. They tried eating leather from suitcases, cotton from seats, and even swallowed snow for water, but it wasn't enough. The freezing weather and lack of rescue pushed them to the edge of starvation. Desperate, weak, and trapped with no plants or animals in the icy mountains, they faced an unthinkable moral dilemma. Roberto Canessa, then a 19-year-old medical student, was among those who made this difficult suggestion to the group. The decision to resort to anthropophagy, the consumption of human flesh, was not made lightly and caused great emotional distress and moral conflict among the survivors, who were mostly Roman Catholic and knew the deceased as friends, classmates, or relatives. Canessa made the initial incision into the body with a shard of glass, setting an example for the others to follow. Some survivors, grappling with the profound moral and religious implications of their actions, reportedly found parallels between the consumption of human flesh and the Catholic sacrament of the Eucharist, which symbolizes the body and blood of Jesus Christ. This comparison was a way to rationalize their desperate act within their faith framework. After spending nearly 2 months trapped in the frozen Andes with no rescue in sight, 3 brave survivors, Fernando Parrado, Roberto Canessa, and Antonio Vizintin, decided to take a bold step. They would climb out of the mountains and search for help. On December 12, 1972, wearing makeshift boots made from seat covers and carrying little food, mostly small pieces of human flesh wrapped in cloth, the trio set off on an unimaginable journey. Their plan was simple but deadly: climb over the Andes and find civilization. They climbed steep, icy slopes without any climbing gear. After 3 days of painful trekking, they reached the top of a high mountain. What they saw crushed their hopes: more endless mountains. They were still deep in the Andes. But Parrado, with incredible mental strength, said, "We may die trying, but we must keep going." Since they were running low on food, Antonio Vizintin returned to the crash site to conserve supplies. Parrado and Canessa continued alone, trekking for 10 days through snow, cold, and rough terrain. Amazingly, Antonio reached the camp in just 1 hour with makeshift sleigh, a journey that had taken 3 days to climb up. That's how steep and dangerous the ascent had been. Finally, on December 20th, they saw something amazing: a river and green valleys. They had reached the edge of the mountains. By December 21st, they spotted a Chilean herdsman across the river. The man, named Sergio Catalan, couldn't cross the fast river, but Parrado wrote a message on paper and threw it wrapped around a stone. The note said, "I come from a plane that crashed in the mountains. I need help." Catalan rode his horse for hours to alert the authorities. Within 48 hours, helicopters reached the crash site and rescued the remaining 14 survivors, all because of the incredible courage and strength of Parrado and Canessa, and the early help from Vizintin. Within just days of the rescue, newspapers around the world began publishing shocking headlines and graphic photos. One Uruguayan newspaper printed a picture of a half-buried skeleton, the remains of a crash victim, right on the front page. Then came the news that stunned the public. The survivors had stayed alive by eating the flesh of their dead companions. This revelation caused a global sensation. Some people were horrified. Others were sympathetic. The media called it cannibalism, and it was splashed across newspapers in bold, dramatic letters. There was outrage, curiosity, and deep moral debate. The survivors knew the truth would eventually come out. So just a day after the first wave of headlines, Roberto Canessa and Gustavo Zerbino held a press conference in Montevideo. Calmly and bravely, they explained the unimaginable choice they had faced. Though the crash site itself lies deep in the mountains, far from roads or towns, surprisingly, an abandoned hotel, namely Termas del Sosnido, was existed as the last accessible point by vehicle, just 21 kilometers from the crash site. 2 powerful films have portrayed the 1972 Andes flight tragedy. Alive, 1993, the newer Spanish film, Society of the Snow, 2023, offers a more emotional, realistic view.